No. So we start with questions. Secretary of State for the Environment, Food and Rural Affairs, Justin Mathers.
Good morning, Mr. Speaker. Number one, please.
Good morning. 40 projects have been selected to proceed to the development stage of the £25 million Natural Flood Management Programme. That includes a broad range of locations from Almouth to St Austell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm grateful for the response from the Secretary of State. I'm working with residents in the Chase Way and Kendall Drive area of Great Sutton alongside Environment Agency representatives and members of the local authority to try and find a solution to the flooding problems that we have there. There are lots of different pots of money that are available at different times, and sometimes it's difficult to understand what the realistic chances are of us being able to succeed in getting the funding that we need to bridge the gap we've got at the moment to get the works done. So would it be possible for me to meet with either the Secretary of State or some of his team to talk about what realistic funding options we have for the area?
Well, first, can I thank him for his engagement, and yes, I'll arrange a meeting with the relevant member of the team. The information is on gov.uk. There are 2 projects near his constituency. I know with the Cheshire Wildlife Trust and the Mersey's River Trust involved in this, but I welcome his engagement. It's a good scheme, and I'm sure he gets that meeting.
So, Mike Penning.
Mr. Speaker, in my constituency, I've been working with the Environment Agency to address a small flood problem on the River Gay in my constituency, and the Environment Agency have been very helpful and met with me going forward. In another part of my constituency, the River Ver has been yet again flooded with sewage. Now, this is unacceptable, and the Environment Agency need to take it seriously and take action against the water companies rather than actually just say, we'll work with you. Action is what my constituents want.
Well, I agree, and that's exactly why we are increasing 4-fold the number of inspections, so that water companies are not marking their homework. It's why we've got the plan for water of my former Secretary of State, significant additional investment. It's why we're taking tougher enforcement action. The Environment Agency's got the biggest ever criminal prosecution, and it's also why we're taking action on things like bonuses for those companies that commit serious wrongdoing.
Sir Edward Leigh.
Number 2, sir.
With permission, Mr. Speaker, I'd like to group question 2 and 5 together. Food security is more important than ever, which is why we need to back British farmers to keep putting food on our tables whilst also protecting the environment. And that is why we're supporting farming with £2.4 billion of annual spending, an average boost of 10% for the SFI payment scheme, and new rules to ensure they get a fair price for their products.
Sir Edward.
Obviously, farmers in low-lying areas of Lincolnshire are suffering from flooding, so any update on the support that can be given them would be very helpful. But I have a specific question for him. Can the government update us when it will announce a long-term funding solution it promised for internal drainage boards to address the pressure on local authorities through special levies?
Well, he's right to focus on the importance of drainage boards, particularly in Lincolnshire. He knows I have a particular constituency interest in the adjacent area to that. That is why we've announced £75 million of funding for that, and the Minister of Water will make further announcements on that shortly. But we are looking more widely at the huge pressure on farming from the wet weather, particularly in areas like Lincolnshire. We've seen a 60% increase in terms of rainfall, the second wettest 6 months, and there's a series of easements, particularly with SFI, we're looking at to help ensure farmers get their payments.
Jamie Stone.
Mr. Speaker, on behalf of my party, I too would like to wish Phil, the head doorkeeper, a very happy birthday. As the government knows, we grow the very finest of seed potatoes in the far north of Scotland, and they're particularly good because, relatively speaking, they're virus-free. That is probably because of the northerly latitudes where they're grown. I happen to know that European markets are crying out, farmers in Europe are crying out to get hold of these seed potatoes. Can I ask the government to do everything in its power to make sure the potatoes go where they're needed and wanted?
Secretary of State.
Well, he makes a very valid point, both in terms of the quality but also the desirability of the products to which he refers. That is why the Minister for Farming is engaging actively with the EU on that specific point, and I'm sure he will update the honourable member on that moving forward.
Chair of the Select Committee, Sir Robert Goodwill.
Speaker, one only has to look over the hedges of eastern England to agree with those who are predicting the worst harvest in living memory. Could I ask the Secretary of State what assessment he's made of the impact this will have on the wider rural economy, but in particular the availability and price of straw? This is so vital for the livestock sector, and important commodities such as potatoes, which are likely to be under great pressure in terms of supply and price this autumn?
Well, as ever, my right honourable friend is absolutely on the money in terms of the concern, both in terms of straw prices, but also in terms of lower harvests this autumn. That is why we're engaging very extensively with the sector. We've got the Farm to Fork Summit chaired by the Prime Minister next week, and that is an indication of how seriously we are taking this and how much we're engaging with farmers and farm leaders.
Onwurah.
Mr. Speaker, it's North East Week in the parliamentary canteens, and I hope all members are taking the opportunity to enjoy great North Eastern produce. It's always North East Week in Gainsborough Market in Newcastle, which tries to champion local farmers and produce. What is the Secretary of State doing to support North East farmers in the challenges they face to produce sustainable and affordable food for my constituents facing a cost of living crisis?
Secretary of State.
As the MP for North East Cambridgeshire, I feel like I should extend North East to go a little wider, given we're a big food producing area. But to her specific point, the Minister for Farming is actually engaging. I think he's travelling up there this evening as part of that engagement. Our colleague Will Quince is currently conducting a review into the public sector procurement. So within our public sector, we can make better procurement in terms of the produce that we produce domestically. We also have a review into labelling, so we can more clearly label that fantastic produce from the North East to ensure that purchasers can buy it more easily.
Mr. Daniel Zeichner.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. What is the government doing to support farmers? Well, quite a few people are asking that. And I think when one looks at the evidence at the moment of what is going on, when one looks at the survey this week from the National Farmers Union into farmer confidence, what they revealed was a staggering 65% of farmers are facing declining profits or their business won't survive at all. Their prospects are worse than most Tory MPs, it suddenly seems. So why is it that farmers do so badly under the Conservatives?
Secretary of State.
Well, he seems to have written that question before listening to the various examples I have quite literally just given. But let me give the honourable gentleman one. The most successful scheme DEFRA has ever run is the current Sustainable Farming Incentive Scheme. Over 20,000 applications, more than any other scheme that the department has run. But we are also then being flexible around that, looking at how those schemes are delivered given the challenges, although whether and I'll have more to say on that very shortly.
SNP spokesperson Stephen Ball.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I listened carefully to that answer, and while Brexit has been deeply damaging to farmers all across the United Kingdom, the actions taken by the Scottish Government mean that farmers in Scotland have far greater protection than those elsewhere on these islands. The SNP Government has guaranteed Scottish farmers the level of funding that was available pre-Brexit, unlike the Tories here in England or indeed the Labour Party in Wales. That's the SNP standing up for farmers in words and deeds, unlike the Westminster parties. So will he take this opportunity to apologise to farmers in England for his government's betrayal of them?
Seriously.
I just refer the honourable member to the 2.4 billion in the manifesto, which was our commitment. That is being met, Mr. Speaker, in full.
Teresa Villiers.
Question number 3, please, Mr. Speaker, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This government has put in place the most comprehensive regime ever to increase tree planting, and crucially, it's underpinned by legislation in the Environment Act and legally binding targets to increase our tree cover to 16.5, and that's all supported and backed up by our £675 million Nature for Climate Fund, and to date 15 million trees have been planted under this government. That's more trees than any other decade.
Teresa Villiers.
I thank the Minister for that answer. Trees obviously need to play a crucial role if we're going to meet our commitments on nature recovery and net zero. And trees are also a tremendous source of happiness, of well-being, of landscape beauty. So to meet these ambitious tree planting goal that the government set itself, can it streamline the permissions process? Because some of the red tape seems disproportionate and needs regulatory reform.
Minister.
I thank her for that and the work she's done in her own constituency to encourage tree planting. But she's absolutely right in terms of the process needs to be fast and simple, and that's why we have taken that on board. And recently, the Forestry Commission has introduced the Woodland Creation fast track, aiming to help decide eligible woodland creation offers within just 12 weeks. And to inform that, they've developed a low sensitivity map of the whole country to show people where is the best place to plant trees, or where they could think about it, that's not on our best available agricultural land, because obviously that's important for food.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Led by the Woodland Trust, the Tree Equity Score UK is a map-based application created to help address disparities in urban tree distribution by identifying the areas in greatest need of investment in trees. So can I ask the Minister to say specifically what the Department is doing to promote increased tree cover in those parts of the country that need it most?
I thank him for that, but I also highlight that low sensitivity map, which is also pointing out exactly things as is that map he referred to. And we have many funds particularly focused on urban areas. Some of those come from DCLG to encourage urban tree planting, because that's so important for our health and well-being. So we have a whole list of funds available, and I would urge people to look at them and plant trees.
Shadow Minister Toby Perkins.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I have to say that the Minister's response just suggests the government are completely in denial. The Office for Environmental Protection's report exposed that the government is way off target on its legally binding tree planting target. There's been no trend improvement on tree planting between 2018 and 2023. Now, it would be bad enough if the problem was a lack of money, but the Minister's department are even failing to spend the money they have been allocated. Elms is underspent by hundreds of millions. The Nature for Climate Fund that she spoke about has returned £77 million to the Treasury unspent. So isn't it clear that to get the tree cover our country needs, we don't need a magic money tree, we need a Labour government?
Minister.
Well, I would ask the honourable gentleman to look at his own tree planting record, because actually we have planted more trees under this government than than certainly they did. And what I would say is we have the plan in place now, so that if one looks at the graph, it's ramping up to hit those targets. We've actually got the plan in place for all the training, the skills. We had forest apprenticeships, and we have the framework in place to reach our target.
Petroldus.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Number 4, please.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We are investing approximately £1.3 billion of our £5.6 billion flood and coastal risk management investment programme on coastal projects. These projects will better protect over 100,000 properties as well as critical infrastructure. And the Environment Agency is also running the £36 million government-funded Coastal Transition Accelerator programme, which is funding coastal authorities to explore how they can better support their coastal communities.
Petroldus.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I'm most grateful to my honourable friend for that answer. The East Anglian coast has taken a real battering in recent months, and projects like the Lowestoft Flood Defence Scheme have been delayed. With our region being the most vulnerable from climate change and a lead player in delivering net zero for the UK, will my honourable friend consider a climate change risk assessment on which a regional coast defence strategy can then be prepared, which properly protects homes, businesses, ports, farmland, infrastructure, as well as nurturing our unique coastal environment?
Well, Mr. Speaker, there is no better champion for the challenge of coastal erosion than my honourable friend, the member for Wavenley. And the Environment Agency is developing a new national flood risk assessment and an updated coastal erosion risk map to improve how we access and communicate flood risk to our communities. And these new data sets and maps will include the potential of impact on climate change, on flood risk and coastal erosion, and of course will help inform how we better protect homes, businesses, farmland, infrastructure along our coastal communities.
Mr. Emma Hardy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We learned from the Public Accounts Committee report that 500 flood defence projects have been cancelled, just like the one in Lowestoft. But whether the Minister chooses to use the word cancelled or deferred or delayed or on a long list, it makes no difference, because he's still refusing to tell us where they are. Why does he insist on holding residents and treating them with contempt by not telling them the fate of their local flood defences?
Minister.
Well, Mr Speaker, I and my officials have been reviewing the applications that have been put forward, and announcements will be coming very, very soon, Mr Speaker. But this government is investing £1.3 billion on flood defences, which is more than ever before, and we will continue to make sure that we are better protecting coastal communities.
Dr. Therese Coffey.
Question number 6.
Secretary of State.
The 100 catchment-based approach partnerships that are set out in the Plan for Water, taking that catchment-based approach is exactly the right one. I agree with the decision taken by my right honourable friend on that. That is exactly the approach that we are taking. In terms of the financial year, there's £15,000 allocated to each catchment for that.
Dr. Therese Coffey.
My right honourable friend for that. And the Plan for Water is starting to work in terms of community partnerships. Next week, the River Deben will be publishing, the Suffolk Catchment Partnership will be publishing the plan for the River Deben. Could I encourage my friend, though, to try and accelerate some of these, to potentially increase the funding from £15,000 per partnership to £50,000, so every single partnership can have a full-time employee to really drive this action?
Well, I think very much in agreement with my right to my friend, what we're doing is twofold. First, we are increasing funding. So she would have seen yesterday we announced an uplift, £11.5 million for local community-led projects to improve river catchments. But alongside that, we are also looking at some major interventions in catchments. So, for example, on the River Wye, where we allocated £35 million, taking a very targeted approach to catchment-specific issues. In that catchment, it was chicken litter, the phosphate going into the River Wye, and the impact, and their funding anaerobic digesters is a targeted way of taking a catchment approach.
Ruth Cadbury.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. 3.6 million hours when sewage was being discharged into our rivers, including the River Thames in my constituency. Funding is only part of cleaning up this mess. The whole water sector is broken and needs to be put into special measures. So what is the Minister's long-term plan for tackling these issues, or is he content to keep following our lead and take up Labour's policies?
Well, the first thing, Mr Speaker, is £4.5 billion of investment over the last 8 years in Thames Tideway that is going to have a significant improvement to the water quality of the River Thames. Alongside that, we're stepping up inspections, a fourfold increase in inspections. We're tackling bonuses to companies that are guilty of pollution. We're taking much tougher enforcement with the biggest ever prosecution by the Environment Agency of water firms. So there's a whole range of actions coupled with the Plan for Water, which is both bringing additional investment into the sector but also taking a catchment by catchment approach.
Jane Dunn.
Question 7, please, sir.
Minister.
Mr Speaker, with your permission, I'd like to group this question with question 15. We're driving down emissions and concentrations of the most harmful air pollutants, reducing their impact on public health and the environment. Through the Environment Act, we introduced further legal targets for fine particulate matter. We've allocated £883 million to support local authorities, and air pollution has fallen significantly since 2010, with emissions of nitrogen oxide down by 48%, PM2.5 down 24%, and sulphur dioxide down 74%.
Jane Dunn.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. Given that incinerator capacity far outweighs waste, I welcome the Government's decision to introduce a short-term pause in the determination of applications for environmental permits for certain types of waste incineration facilities. Will the Minister please now extend this pause beyond its current official end date of the 24th of May and include existing incinerators that have applied to increase their capacity? Thank you.
Minister.
Mr Speaker, I'm grateful for her question. So our assessment of incineration capacity and needs is ongoing. I don't want to prejudge the outcome of that work or any of the next steps. However, the Government is clear that proposed waste incineration facilities must not result in overcapacity or compromise our ambitions to minimise waste and improve recycling.
Munira Wilson.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. Last month, my local authority of Richmond-upon-Thames, along with other councils, was informed by DEFRA that its local air quality grant of £1 million, which had been awarded just 2 months earlier, was being rescinded. With a number of areas in Twickenham breaching air quality standards, including close to schools, and with WHO targets becoming ever more stringent, how does the Minister think he's meeting his commitment to, and I quote, expand resources available to councils to improve air quality?
Yes.
Well, I'm grateful for a question, and it does give us the opportunity to highlight the great progress that we're making in this area. We want to continue to make progress and to support local authorities, but we did have concerns that the local air quality scheme was not delivering the most positive outcomes, and some of the bids that were coming forward were not aimed at driving down or improving air quality. We had bids for a robotic chat box, for a kinetic art project. We want to focus actually on improving air quality and make sure we're funding local authorities to do just that.
Duncan Baker.
Question number 8, please, Mr. Speaker.
Minister. Mr. Speaker, I'm grateful to find the place in my pack. So, under the Animal Welfare Act 2006, groomers must protect dogs under their control from harm and provide for their welfare needs. Where the Act is breached, offenders face imprisonment or an unlimited fine. And as the legislation is already clear, we don't have any plans at this moment to implement a charter.
Duncan Baker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. One of my constituents recently brought quite a distressing case to my office, where a routine trip to the dog groom has turned into a disaster for her beloved pet because the dog was seriously injured due to the groomer using the incorrect equipment, resulting in painful lacerations, multiple veterinary visits and permanent scarring. Now, unfortunately, Mr. Speaker, that's not an isolated case, and whilst I'm aware, as the Minister says, that the Animal Welfare Act does provide some framework in regard to intentionally causing harm, I'm amazed at the lack of regulation in the industry. So can I ask the Minister to make an assessment of what further steps can be taken to legislate to regulate the dog grooming industry to ensure the safety of all dogs?
Minister.
Well, I'm grateful for raising this case, and I'm obviously sympathetic to his constituent whose pet suffered that poor practice. The government's belief is in the importance of animal welfare underpins the strong protections included in the Animal Welfare Act, and we will take steps to address widespread welfare issues where they do arise.
Right, James Wild.
Number 9, please, sir.
Minister.
I don't know, one after the other. So officials are currently assessing planned residual waste treatment capacity, including incineration, against expected future residual waste arising in England. This is so that we can understand our future capacity needs following implementation of key commitments in the resources and waste strategy. This capacity assessment will be published in due course.
James Wild.
My North West Norfolk constituents welcome the moratorium on new waste incinerators and the review. But as incinerators already operating and those with consent provide enough capacity as we meet legally binding targets to halve residual waste, can I urge him to make that temporary pause permanent so we don't have an unnecessary and unwanted incinerator in Wisbech?
Minister.
Well, again, Mr. Speaker, I'm grateful for the question, but DEFRA officials are currently scoping the need for a review of the role of waste incineration facilities. I don't want to prejudge the conclusions of that exercise. The current pause period will end on the 24th of May, and the next steps will be announced no later than that date.
Henry Smith.
Question 10, sir.
Minister.
This government remains absolutely committed to implement our action plan for animal welfare, and since the action plan was published in 2021, we've made significant progress on a whole raft of animal welfare measures, introducing tougher sentences on animal cruelty and new laws on animal sentience, bringing forward legislation to ban live exports and keeping primates as pets, launching the animal welfare and welfare pathway, microchipping of cats, and backing critical legislation to crack down on puppy smuggling, pet abduction and livestock worrying.
Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm grateful for that answer and indeed for all of the animal welfare measures that this government has introduced. Recently, Larch class at Three Bridges Primary School wrote to me very eloquently concerned about the welfare of endangered species and their protection. Can the Minister say a little bit more about what the Department for the Environment is doing in that respect?
I thank him for that, also for his own work on animal welfare in this place, which has been impressive. And also thank you to the class, the Larch class, in his Three Bridges Primary School. And you can go back and tell them this government is absolutely committed to tackling and helping endangered species. And actually, we are the first government to actually legislate for nature to halt the decline in species in this country. And as far as I know, no other country has ever done that anywhere in the world. And we've got funds to save species. You can tell them, I think they might hear about otters returning up rivers, about saving red kites because we protected them from persecution, about saving chalk hill blue and more.
Number 11, Mr. Speaker.
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And with your permission, I'd like to group questions 11 and 12. Nationally, fly tipping on public land has fallen for the second year in a row, with enforcement actions up by 5%. But we all know the huge detrimental impact fly tipping can have on our communities. Fly tipping fines have more than doubled, and we are now expecting local authorities to reinvest that income in enforcement and cleaning up our streets. And we are going further with reforms on how waste carriers are regulated, with the introduction of digital waste tracking to help local authorities continue to crack down on waste crime.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and can I thank my honourable friend for his answer. What landowners and the public want is for this to stop. Can I therefore suggest that we I realise that we've doubled the fines, massively increased them again, that we ensure that all cases are prosecuted and that prosecutions are publicised widely to reassure both the public, to reassure the victims and deter the perpetrators.
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I couldn't agree more with actually promoting the convictions that take place. Absolutely provides reassurance to victims, but also reassures them that the government and local authorities are taking tough action. I know that he has also got particular concerns with what's happening across the countryside, which is why DEFRA is funding the National Rural Crime Unit to explore the police's role in tackling fly tipping and how that can be optimised, and working together with local authorities to deal with this crime.
Well.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Across Uxbridge and South Ruislip, fly tipping is a concern for many local residents. I would like to pay tribute to Mary from Useley, Bernie from South Ruislip, Wendy in Cowley and Donna from Ruislip Gardens, who all act as community champions in reporting regular fly tipping. I also need to mention the waste service team at Hillingdon Council, who work tirelessly in responding to regular cases of fly tipping. All of this great work from residents and the council can only go so far. So what can my honourable friend let me know what further funding and support is available to specifically target fly tipping hotspots?
We are, Minister.
Mr. Speaker, we have provided nearly £1.2 million to help local authorities combat fly tipping, and our grants are focused on hotspot areas where they have funded around 200 CCTV cameras plus other infrastructure, including fencing, signage and mobile tips. And a further £1 million is due to be released shortly, which will help further tackle these hotspot areas. And I want to pay tribute to Mary, Wendy and indeed all of his constituents who are getting involved in helping him.
We now come to Topicals, Dr. Therese Coffey.
Number 1.
Mr. Speaker, since last update in the House, we remain focused on delivering our plan to improve food security, improve our water quality and lead the way both at home and abroad in protecting the environment. That is why we're introducing legislation to ban the supply and sale of wet wipes containing plastic. It's why we've launched, as part of our catchment plan, the £35 million scheme on the River Wye. Further to our announcement yesterday of £11.5 million using water company fines and penalties to reinvest back in water restoration schemes. We are working on Dartmoor with David Thurston's report to implement the very good recommendations that he set out, and we have seen over 20,000 farmers now sign up to the Sustainable Farming Incentive, making it the most popular scheme ever. Alongside that, Mr. Speaker, working at the G7, blue tongue virus and many others, but I can see you want speed in my reply.
Get your colleagues in, Dr. Therese Coffey.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I thank my right honourable friend for that. And the 2021 Environment Act was landmark legislation. And, of course, we need to think not only locally but globally. One of the elements was about introducing forest risk commodity regulations. I'd be grateful for an update from my honourable friend on what we can do in terms of our global supply chain measures.
Well, I think she's quite right to focus on the forest risk commodities. It was our flagship announcement at COP28 that we are taking leading action on that. For those that have watched the nature programmes on things like the orangutan, they can see how important this is to particular species. I hope to be tabling legislation on that later this month, but she is right to focus on its importance.
Secretary of State Steve Reid.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The environmental regulator has today condemned the disgusting state of our waterways caused by the Conservatives letting water companies pump them full of raw sewage. This has to stop. So will the government now back Labour's plan and make water bosses personally, criminally liable? So if they keep illegally dumping sewage, they end up in the dock?
Well, Mr. Speaker, we already have the biggest ever prosecution by the Environment Agency, which is already live. We're already taking action to ban bonuses of those companies guilty of serious pollution. We're quadrupling the number of inspections as part of that tougher enforcement scheme. We're bringing record investment into the water industry as well. He never comments on the quality of water in Wales, and perhaps he wants to address that in his follow-up question.
We'll try Lincolnshire. Sir Edward Leigh.
In response to my earlier question, the Secretary of State said that food security was of urgent national concern. Has any agricultural minister sitting on that bench ever met a farmer who has denied that 3B land is just as good for growing crops, arable crops, as 3A land?
Well, when it comes to the farming minister being a farmer, he is extremely well placed to talk about the quality of land and how it plays, given that he himself farms. The point is, we recognise, in fact, this is part of the wider debate around the clustering of solar sites, for example, on farmland. We recognise the importance of food security. He can see the shift in focus around our environmental schemes to those that also align with food security, because I believe, Mr. Speaker, that food security is instrumental to our national security, and that affects our land use as well.
Ian Byrne.
In the Ethics Committee's report published last year, it was recommended that we support the United Nations Special Rapporteur in the Right to Food's request to undertake a country visit to the UK before the end of 2023. The government initially indicated it would facilitate this, but the Minister's latest correspondence to me states it will not be feasible to invite the Special Rapporteur this year. Why is it not feasible before the general election? Because the UN are ready and waiting.
Serious State.
Well, I'm very happy to look at the specific issue that he raises in terms of the UN, but what we are clear on is the importance of food production, food security and backing our farmers. It is left-wing councils down the country that, for example, are banning meat and acting in a way that is contrary to the interests of many of our farmers.
Jane Hunt.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. What can be done to improve compensation payments for cattle farmers following a TB outbreak?
Secretary of State.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker, and we are obviously constantly working with those farmers that are facing the misery of a TB outbreak. I'm aware of an outbreak in her own constituency in Leicestershire, which is, of course, very painful for the individual farmers that face that outbreak. That's why we must throw everything we can at this terrible disease, every tool in the toolbox to try and stop TB from spreading up and down England.
George Galloway.
I'm so old, Mr. Speaker. I grew up in a land without plastic. A better Britain wrapped in brown paper and string. Last year, our households on this small island handled 90,000 million tonnes of plastic. It's indestructible. You can't burn it. You can't get rid of it. Will the Minister support the Global Plastics Treaty, campaigned for by Greenpeace and others?
Well, this government is taking action on plastics. Let me give him a specific example. There's been a 93% reduction in the use of plastic bags as a result of measures that this government has taken. If he looks at the communique from the G7 in Turin, you'll see that the government was supporting action on plastics, building on the work that was also announced from Ottawa last week.
Steve Double.
Thank you, Speaker. Many communities in my constituency face the double whammy of coastal tidal flooding and fluvial river flooding. We've seen significant investment in places like Par and St Blasey through the STAR project, which the Minister has been to see, and recently completed flood defences at Pentuin. But the village of Morganporth remains very vulnerable to both river and coastal flooding, yet I cannot get any real progress in developing a scheme to reduce the flood risk there. Would the Minister meet with me to look at what can we do to protect Morganporth?
Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, having been to Cornwall and seen the STAR project myself and met with my honourable friend, I am more than happy to meet with him to discuss what more we can do, because I know that he and his colleagues on the council are championing this scheme as much as they can, and I'm more than happy to help with that project.
Sam Dixon.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The sun may be shining today, but it's been a long, cold, wet spring for our farmers. Given the prediction that 17% of crops will be lost, What assessment has the Secretary of State made for the number of farming businesses that will reluctantly stop producing food, and how will he make sure that the Farmers' Flood Fund reaches all the farmers who desperately need it?
It's an extremely valid point that she raises. It's a shared concern, I think, across the House. Everyone can see the impact of the wet weather. That is why we're constantly and continually engaging with the sector. We have the Farm to Fork Summit as part of that engagement, and we're looking at what easements can be granted, both in terms of schemes such as FFI, but also more widely, and I will have more to say on that very shortly.
Damien Moore.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Southport has seen millions of pounds worth of investment into drainage capacity for water. Unfortunately, the villages of Tarleton, Hesketh Bank and Banks have not. These are farming communities which are being devastated by flooding. The Minister for Farming met with my honourable friend, the member for South Ribble, and myself last year. It was appreciated by farmers. However, more needs to be done. A report has been submitted to the department. We want to set up an internal drainage board. What more can be done to make sure this is done at pace to help these communities?
Secretary of State.
Well, as I touched on earlier, I'm a huge supporter of the work of our internal drainage boards. I think they do a superb job. That is why the Minister for Water made the decision to allocate an additional £75 million. We'll, of course, look at constructively what more can be done in more areas through the focus of drainage boards. You'll have seen we've already flexed our regulations in response, for example, to Storm Hemel, and we're looking at what further things we can do.
Dave Dougan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Brexit has been a disaster for farmers across the United Kingdom, but at least in Scotland they have the certainty of funding going out beyond 2027, unlike in Labour-run Wales and Tory-run England. What steps will this government take to provide the same level of surety for English farmers that the SNP have delivered in Scotland for Scotland's farmers?
And as a former Chief Secretary, anyone who thinks that the way the SNP allocate their Barnett consequentials gives funding security to farming, I think would be somewhat bold in that claim. The point with Brexit is we can tailor our response to the needs of our farmers, whether that's through specific legislation like gene editing to develop disease and drought-resistant crops. It's whether through our procurement legislation, so we better leverage our public sector procurement. It's whether our labelling legislation, so we can better support British producers. And it's through schemes like the SFI that's the most popular ever run by DEFRA, with over 20,000 farmers now signed up.
Mary Robinson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In the past, flooding from the Lady Brook and Micker Brook, which runs through Bramall, Cheelhume and Cheadle to join the River Mersey, has caused devastation to homes and families. Would my right honourable friend agree with me that joint working across the region is part of the solution, and continue his support for the Upper Mersey Catchment Partnership working?
Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I know that my honourable friend has raised this case specifically with me before, and I'm more than happy to meet with her to have those conversations at speed, because I know just how valuable projects like flood alleviation schemes are to her constituents in better protecting more homes.
Bridgen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. North West Leicestershire has benefited enormously from being the heart of the National Forest, with millions of trees planted over the last 40 years, much of it on degraded former colliery land. As desirable as tree planting is, it has to be balanced against food security. Does the Minister agree that good agricultural land must be protected to produce good food?
Minister.
First of all, I must commend the National Forest for all that it has achieved, and many farmers actually involved in that forest too. But that's why the Forestry Commission's map is so important, showing where is the best place for tree planting, and that is not on what we call best available land. We have specified that really needs to be the main priority is food production.
That completes